Before I move on, I must record publicly two apologies. The first is from the local state member, Miss Leanne Linane, who was unable to accept the invitation for today. And the other one, more recently this morning, we've heard that our old friend Ernie Beard from the 9th Battalion, the Moreton Regiment of the Second War, is not up to being here with us this morning. His son Greg is here, and we thank Greg for at least representing his dad and letting us know the state of play at home. Brigadier Ray Mcnabb, CSC, RFD, retired from the Army Reserve earlier this year. After 33 years service in the active reserve. I know he won't want me to tell you a lot about himself. He is that sort of person. Rather being received here this morning with pomp and ceremony, he was the first through the door. I think that says enough about the type of person that Ray Mcnabb is. However, it would be remiss of me if I didn't tell you that amongst his senior appointments in that 33 years was the following postings. He was the Chief Instructor of the Officer Cadet Training Unit of the 1st Training Group. Most importantly, he was a Commanding Officer of the 9th Battalion, the Royal Queensland Regiment. He was a Staff Officer Grade 1, responsible for Officer Career Management with the Army Personnel Agency, Brisbane. And I think for the first time ever for a reserve officer, he was the Deputy Commander of the 7th Brigade, after which this park is named. He also proceeded to be the Chief Instructor of the Regional Training Centre, South Queensland, and finally Assistant Commander, Training Command, Australian Army. For his service in those 33 years, Ray was awarded the Conspicuous Service Cross and the Reserve Forces Direct Decoration. I should also mention he is a citizen soldier and he has worked in local government in Queensland for many years. Currently, and his special bent is major events, which he's currently responsible for with the Gold Coast City Council. I liked the little bit that he added onto what he advised me about some of his aspects when he said in his spare time he is the President of the United Service Club on Wickham Terrace. I'm not sure if he thought he gained that spare time when he retired from the reserve or whether he thought he had it before, but I'm sure Janice could tell me later on a little more about that. To open the first Ashore display officially, would you please welcome Brigadier Ray Mcnabb.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, friends and family of 9th Battalions all. Before I start, could I acknowledge some of our distinguished friends here today. The Honourable Wayne Swan, MP, Federal Member for Lilly, Councillor Fiona King from the Marchant Ward of Brisbane City Council, Mr Adrian McCabe from the Department of Veteran Affairs, Mr Alex Garland, President of the National Servicemen's Association, Mr Ian Jemson, CEO of the Queensland Maritime Museum, and some of the senior members of the 9th Battalion's family. Brigadier Peter Smith, former regimental colonel, former CEO of 9RQR. Brigadier Rod Hamilton, patron of the 9th Battalion's Association, former CEO of 9RQR. Colonel Chris Austin, President of the 9th Battalion's Association and former CEO 9RQR. Colonel Mark Plath, President of the Museum Trust, former CEO of 9RQR. I notice up the back there, Lieutenant Colonel Peter Ball, former CEO of 9RQR. The luckiest one of us all, Lieutenant Colonel Luke Hughes, who is the current CEO of 9RQR. And before I finish my acknowledgements, I must acknowledge Pat O'Keefe. Pat is currently the director of the First Ashore project, has been a dynamo behind the scenes of the association and the museum over the years, and before that he was within 9RQR. Thank you, Pat. Now, when Pat asked me to open this display this morning, he said I should speak for 10 minutes. He didn't tell me there were 3 minutes worth of acknowledgements of distinguished guests, so my time starts now, Pat.
Right, sir.
My name's Ray Mcnabb. I'm a member of the 9th Battalion's family because I was CEO of Heartbeat of Time 20 years ago. And I think everyone who has served in 9th Battalion is enveloped by the battalion's pride and spirit and becomes part of that family for life. And that pride and spirit springs from the deeds of our grandfathers and fathers and uncles and great uncles, etc., that have served in the various incarnations of the 9th Battalion over the years and through the generations. From the day of the landing, through the Western Front, in World War II, the 2nd, 9th and 9th Militia Battalions, in 9 RAR in Vietnam, right through to today's 9RQR. The reason we're here today is to commemorate and indeed to celebrate the men who earned the battalion status as first ashore. And I say celebrate because of that inspiration that their deeds have provided ever since. Not just to those who wear the black over blue colour patch, but to all the men and women who served with the rising sun on their uniform. The spirit and characteristics that they displayed are now the values of the Australian Army and have inspired our soldiers ever since. Courage, initiative, teamwork and mateship. Now, the Gallipoli Campaign was innovative. In fact, it was the first opposed amphibious landing in the history of warfare, and it should have produced surprise, but it was doomed for a number of reasons. Now, the Anzac troops could hope for some tactical surprise by landing silently in the dark, but all they could rely on was their own quick action, the momentum that they generated, and on their mates. Courage, initiative, teamwork and mateship. Now, the landing was confused and the stories are confusing to read, but in essence the boats were veered off course and the men were landed a mile north of where they were supposed to be, facing terrain that bore no resemblance whatsoever to their orders and their tasking. Furthermore, the companies and the battalions of the covering force were terribly intermixed. The official history says that the first 2 companies of 9 Battalion were assigned the duty of swinging to their right immediately after landing and rushing the battery on the neck of Gaba Tepe about a mile inland, a mile south of the landing place. The other half of the 9th was to seize a knoll in the objective ridge about a mile due east of the landing place. But on landing, A and B companies of 9th Battalion found they were put ashore not in the vicinity of Gaba Tepe and on the right of the covering force, but under Arni Baru, that is 2 miles north of their Gaba Tepe objective and on the left of 10th Battalion. Now, all the first-hand accounts refer to the laughter and joking in the boats as they were approaching the beach, and I think that betrayed their nervousness and their fears. Because they were ordinary blokes, they weren't fearless supermen, but they acted despite their fears, and that's the definition of courage. The whole furious first day required all their courage, initiative and teamwork. After a short pause to absorb the immediate confusion, it was clear they must attack, to clear the enemy, to prevent them firing onto the beach and onto their mates in the follow-up boats. Soon after landing in the first boat with Lieutenant Chapman and Sergeant Coe, Private James Bostock, who was Chapman's signaller, removed his pack, strapped his highly sophisticated signal gear on his back, i.e. a set of semaphore flags, as the beach was swept with gunfire. Then I followed a charge up the hill led by Jock Fletcher, and so commenced the Battle of the Gallipoli Campaign. On the left flank, Major S.B. Robertson, his mother said he preferred Beresford Robertson, led his B Company up the broken cliffs towards Baby 700, fighting their way up and arriving at the neck about 7 a.m. His orderly, I think it was his orderly because he said he never left. He said he was in charge of Robertson's person and his signal staff. His orderly, Private A.J. Davies, later wrote, going up that hill was just awful. It was hardly possible for a rabbit to live in the fire that we were under. Put your head up and whiz, half a dozen bullets went past. Our chaps, the officers especially, were going down by the dozens. I had some awfully narrow escapes. About 4 o'clock, Major Robertson got one and almost died at once. I went from officer to officer in the company, but they were all nearly all dead. The official history records that Major Robertson, thrice wounded, raised himself to look forward and was shot. "Carry on, Rigby," he said to a junior beside him, and died. Lieutenant W.J. Rigby, a 9th Battalion platoon commander, carried on until he too was killed shortly afterwards. Others pushed inland in the centre and on the right. Lieutenant Joe Coston was the 9th Battalion's machine gun officer, and although he landed in the second line of infantry, he was one of the leaders in the advance up the cliffs. They pushed inland until Turkish reinforcements held them and forced them back to the 400 plateau. The official history says, on the right, where the summit of Lone Pine gave a wide view over the spurs, were the 2 machine guns of 9th Battalion. The fire upon the crest of Lone Pine was now almost beyond endurance. In addition to the Turkish rifles and machine guns, their mountain guns were throwing their salvos rapidly and without cessation onto the summit. And a soldier later said in his witness report, "Lieutenant Coston would stop at nothing. Unfortunately, a shell killed him instantly. Next morning there were only 2 machine gunners left out of the 14 who landed." So those are a couple of examples of the sustained courage on the day of the landing, and there were plenty more in the following months. Brigadier General Monash, commander of 4th Brigade, wrote, "Australia seems to think that our work began and ended with that first rush ashore. That was nothing compared to what followed." And the rest of the Gallipoli campaign was characterised by death, danger, injury, lice, flies and disease, and eventually our troops were evacuated. 9th Battalion had been withdrawn a few weeks prior to the evacuation. But Gallipoli was a picnic compared to the Western Front. When they first arrived there in 1916, charmed by the beauty of the countryside, the civilians and cafes just behind the lines, they used to ask British soldiers, "Been fighting long, or have you been in France?" After Pozieres, they changed their view. Thousands of 9 Battalion's men still lie in foreign fields halfway around the world. They're marked by clutches of headstones on the Gallipoli Peninsula, across France and Belgium, dotted in churchyards around the UK where they died in hospitals from wounds or disease, and even a handful in a little cemetery just outside Baghdad, where they died as POWs sent as work parties in the far-flung corners of the Ottoman Empire. Those whose remains were not recovered are commemorated on the Lone Pine Memorial, on the Menin Gate, or on the Australian Memorial at Villers-Bretonneux. And they lie in North Africa and the Southwest Pacific. Their names are recorded on memorials and honour boards in villages, towns and cities, honoured by today's community at Anzac Days and on occasions such as this. And of course, more Australians are visiting the battlefields and cemetery each year. Winston Churchill said in a speech in London on 16th of December, "We must look forward 100, 200, 300 years to the time when the vast continent of Australia will contain an enormous population, and when that population will look through the world-shaking episode of the Great War, and when they will seek out every detail of that struggle, when the movements of every battalion, every company will be elaborately unfolded to the gaze of all, and when every family will seek to trace some connection with the heroes who landed on the Gallipoli Peninsula or fought on the Somme or in some other great battle." Now, the deeds and values displayed by the first ashore have inspired the family of 9th Battalions in war in places ever since, in places that are synonymous with courage and tenacity and that are evocative even today. In the Great War, in the Second War, and in Vietnam, where 9 RAR soldiers, both regulars and NASHOs, carried the tradition, And of course they've created the family connection that extends to today's 9th Battalion, 9RQR, lest we forget. Now, Pat's told you about the display and how there will be a series of lectures as well, but he didn't tell you that it's been financed by 2 grants, one from the Commonwealth Department of Veteran Affairs and one from the Queensland State Government. And it's also received financial support by the Kedron-Wavell sub-branch of the RSLA, and also technical support from the Queensland Maritime Museum. And of course, Pat and his team making it all come together. I would like to officially declare the first Ashore display open. Thank you.